For 12 years now, we've been doing monthly talks to the public called Seminars about Long-Term Thinking that the Long Now Foundation sponsors in San Francisco. And I don't have a rap about the SALT talks, SALT, Seminars about Long-Term Thinking. This is one of those cases where the acronym ruled. So SALT talks are an ongoing curatorial exploration of people who are talking, writing, thinking about things that bear relation, sometimes tangential, to long-term thinking. Bearing in mind that Long Now, as defined by Ryan Eno and Peter Schwartz for the Long Now Foundation, is the last 10,000 years and the next 10,000 years. So we're building a 10,000-year clock, we're bringing back extinct species, we're cataloging all the languages in the world, and we're giving a pretty highly visible stage to current thinkers. So when Steven Pinker writes his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, the book is incredible. His news is fantastic. Things are getting better in terms of violence and cruelty and injustice at a pretty constant, long-term way. One wants to hear him say it. You tell it with words and presence and slides, and then quizzing on the stage. The format we have for that is we have live audiences of usually over 500 now. They all get a card on which they can write their name and their question. And it comes to the front. Kevin Kelly goes through the cards, hands them to me as the talk finishes. I go up on the stage and engage our speaker, such as Steven Pinker, with the questions that I have and the audience has. And it's a discussion, because on half an hour. This format has worked well enough, and people are amazing enough that the thing keeps growing. There's a huge online audience, I guess 700,000 downloads a year of high-quality videos from 4 TV and the iPods that people listen to in their cars. And surprising legs. So the early talks, such as Jared Diamond way back when, people go back and listen to them. My job is curator, but also I find the people, I get in touch with them, I invite them. They're not getting paid. They do get visibility in a serious context and a fantastic audience. And then I do the Q&A with them on the stage, and then I summarize, which for me is the hardest, in some ways most interesting part, because when Steven Pinker or Elaine Pagels or Jared Diamond or whoever talks for an hour, how do you summarize what they said in a couple of hundred words and send that out to everybody? So it's a form of writing compression that is hard, but I think worth doing. People like it. What it allows us to do is not only get the best of current thinking that bears relation to long-term thinking, but it gets the best of current thinkers in a framework that is not their usual one. Their usual one is selling the book that they just finished, or putting out a message that they put out many times and are perhaps running on automatic. But for this audience in this framework, the frame is long-term thinking, which may or may not have been the way they think about what they're doing. So just last week we had a surprising outreach from the National Security Administration, National Security Agency, which is the NSA. And one of the senior people there is a young woman named Ann Neuberger. NSA is going through travails this year, to put it mildly, and they want to engage with the public. And one of the first places they turned out to be doing that is having Ann come out and, at my invitation, give a talk about basically the reality these days that the NSA is facing, both organizationally from inside, dealing with mistrust, which is now one of the major problems that they've helped inspire, and Edward Snowden mainly helped inspire, and their ongoing world of threats that they face and how that keeps evolving. And she talked about basically the relationship between sort of short-term needs, which is dealing with threats, and the long-term needs of privacy norms, of the responsibilities of governance and the role that the government should be having in relation to its citizens, both to protect their freedoms and to protect their bodies and their digital infrastructure. So it's a case where I think an entity like the NSA, a person representing it, is given permission by this framework of the SALT talks to talk about long-term thinking in relation to their daily urgencies and how they think about them. Now, 10,000 years seems like a long time, and it is for most people. I love it when some people say that's not long enough. And ice ages come and go. Are you guys talking about ice ages coming and going? And actually, we do get people who come in, and it is quite possible that we're now in the Anthropocene, the human-dominated era of geology and climate, and chances are wonderful that we will never see another ice age. It's the kind of thing that helps you think even longer term. We just had an engagement with a celestial object, which is last week. Comet 67P was rendezvoused by the European Space Agency rocket called Rosetta. And onboard Rosetta, even though it launched 10 years ago, is one of our Rosetta disks containing what we have collected then, about 1,500 languages from around the world. And that will go and orbit that comet for millions of years. So any entity in the far distant future beyond 10,000 years, they want to know about the languages of Earth at a certain point, they know where to go. The important thing about the Rosetta disk is that it's not digital. It's just teensy. It is a microscope-readable text of these 1,500 languages. So anybody with an 18th century microscope can read the several tens of thousands of pages that are on a disk just a couple of inches across. Everything digital goes away pretty quickly. And the tools turn over so rapidly that I think the things that do best at sustaining are the ones that don't focus so much on the digital aspect of the tools. One of our first SALT talks was Jimmy Wales from Wikipedia, who said that their software was pretty primitive and crude when they started, and it hasn't tried to stay terribly sophisticated. That the genius of Wikipedia is in the design of its community, the people, how they relate to one another. And they use a rather antique form of online communication. It doesn't matter that it's antique. What matters is the quality of the relationship that they have with each other. And so I think we're going to keep seeing the things that work out long term are going to be perhaps released by new technology, but are not going to be dependent on any particular generation of new technology. It's the case that a lot of the SALT speakers are book authors, and sometimes we get them when they're on book tour. But usually I'm finding them because I want the sustained body of research and analysis that they've done at sort of book scale. These are not tweets. They're not even TED Talks, brilliant as those are, which are short form. This is the long form. And for somebody to hold forth for the better part of an hour what it is they have to say, they have to have mastered quite a bit. And it is not a contradiction that people want a lot of information fast, and they want a lot of information slow. I think it's just a paradox that the more there is the tweet way to sort of keep up with what somebody's thinking, the more there is the reason to engage somebody in some depth. And the advantage of doing that in a theater or in watching a video is you get to watch the person thinking, especially the question and answer periods, which books don't have that in the back. Nothing has that. There's a little bit of it in television interviews, but that's not the same, because with question and answer you've got an audience who's been listening to somebody explain what they're interested in for a good while. And showing a lot of slides or some videos or whatever. And now it's the audience's turn. And the best questions are rising as we sort through them and then turning up on the stage. And the name of the person who's asking the question, they're now part of the show. Mm-hmm. That's, I guess, unique to this form. And it sort of bears relation to what musicians have found, which is that the digital form of their music got commoditized to the point where they can barely make any money on it. Mm-hmm. But the concert form of their music is doing better than ever if they have a strong enough audience to fill a concert hall. What we're finding is that, and this is what you can do with a good series of talks, is if you have a number of known amazing people, Daniel Kahneman and Mark Maurice and Elaine Pagels and so on, show up and talk, and then you invite some people that you know are good, but the general audience doesn't know is good yet, they'll come with a certain amount of trust. And as long as you don't disappoint them more than once in a row, they'll keep coming. And so it can be a venue for newer people, younger people. There's a economist named Mariana Mazzucato who's not widely followed, but she's got the best argument to take down the libertarian perspective on the uses of government with her story that basically government is more entrepreneurial than a private entrepreneur. And it's a good, strong argument. And by the way, she is a highly glamorous, highly energetic person on the stage who can put on quite a show. So people come and see someone they haven't heard of like her, and then they'll keep coming back. And that's part of my job, is to do a mix of ones they know about and ones that people are finding out about. Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things of doing a medium for a while, as you've been finding with Edge, you keep kind of exploring new capabilities, what you can do with Edge. Mm-hmm. Building onto the Reality Club and then moving on and including things like these videos and so on. Likewise with these talks, you can experiment with format. And one that we've developed that the audience likes a lot is we developed a debate format which doesn't have winners and losers. The format is this. We had one, for example, between Neil Ferguson, the historian, and Peter Schwartz, the futurist. And their subject was basically pessimistic versus optimistic perspective on progress. The historian had a pessimistic view and the futurist had an optimistic view. But the debate format was this, that right at the beginning, I asked the audience, who do you want to go first? And then we get a show of hands and yelling, and one of them goes first. And they don't know which one it's going to be once they're on the stage. So the person who goes first gets 15 minutes to make their case. Mm-hmm. And with slides or whatever. And then for 10 minutes, they're going to be quizzed by their debater, by the opponent, kind of in probing mode, not in take them down mode, but sort of interview. Tell me more about this, and this. And then at the end of that 10 minutes, the second debater, the one who's been listening all this time, now has to summarize the argument of the first debater so well that the first debater says, "Huh? You got it." And then they swap roles. And the second one goes up and makes their case. And is quizzed by the first debater, and then has to summarize their point of view to the point where the second debater says, "I guess you got it." And then I start getting questions from the audience, and on we go. And what it does is it, instead of the thing you see on television, the sort of the yelling and combat approach and the put-down approach, this is finding a way to converge to where they're actually talking about, they're understanding the ways in which their language overlaps and the rather small details that they may disagree on. And the audience is included in them discovering that process in real time. Mm-hmm. The audience loves it. Mm-hmm. And indeed, nobody comes out of the winner at the end of the day except maybe better understanding and a realization that you can have debates without fighting. Arguments online tend to exacerbate toward, intellectual violence. Some arguments in person, like on broadcast television, exacerbate toward a kind of a verbal confrontational violence. And occasionally I think stage debates do that. But if you have the proviso that in person, in real time, each of the characters has got to summarize the other person's argument, which is against their argument. Just state it. Something amazing happens. And they don't necessarily convince each other away from where they've been, but they convince the audience that it's a discussion worth having and that it doesn't make everybody feel bad because it's gone violent and weird. Part of the fun of figuring out the range of, we've had over 120 speakers, 12 years, how they relate to Long Now. So one I've got coming up shortly is Drew Indy, who is a leading biotech engineer who's going to talk about the iGEM revolution, this amazing thing going on at MIT where young biotech people from all over the world, by the tens of thousands now, have been creating new organisms, and it's not in the news at all. And if this is a biotech century, those are the ones who are going to create it. I've got Larry Harvey, the guy who founded Burning Man, in a couple months giving a talk on why the man keeps burning, how that seemingly unscalable event could just keep on scaling from year to year. It gets bigger and bigger. Kevin Kelly's going to hold forth about, hopefully, his next book, Technium Unbound. Neil Gaiman is coming to give a talk about how stories last. And he's a storyteller who knows a lot about all the stories in history. Recently, we've had Stefan Kropotkin, a archaeologist, climatologist who's been 40 years wandering in the deepest, weirdest, driest, most forbidding parts of the Sahara and has turned up a new theory basically of how the Egyptian civilization, which means how civilization got started. We had a colonel from the army, Colonel Matthew Bogdanos, who talked about how in the Iraq War, when the museum in Baghdad was destroyed and looted, how he was able to work with the locals and with the international antiquities market to basically restore most of that museum and get it back. And those are some of the earliest artifacts in human history. Brian Eno and Danny Hillis had a conversation a while back. One of the most popular things we do is every year in December at the Castro Theater, which is one of our biggest theaters, we completely fill it for a film archivist named Rick Prelinger. And Rick just collects old footage, film footage of the Bay Area. New stuff every year, and he shows it. People call out the things they recognize. And it's like a big community memory fest. Richard Curran from the Smithsonian, who did a take on the book that came out of the British Museum on the history of the world in 100 objects. He basically did the history of America in 101 objects, because we're always going one better. Adam Stelzner came here from Caltech and explained how he and his gang of engineers did the impossible of lowering the Curiosity rover onto the surface of Mars. Peter Schwartz, who was part of was one of our board members from the beginning, and he was part of a conference that was held on how to spend the next 100 years developing starships. He gave a optimistic talk on that the starships are coming. And Neil Kahneman explained probably one last time in public the difference between fast and slow thinking. A fellow named Craig Childs, who's been examining how the various ways that the world convulses and with ice ages and volcanic ages and so on. He goes to places in the world where it's like that now. That again takes on the long term. Ed Liu is from the B612 Foundation, where they are developing the technique to detect all potential harmful asteroids for Earth and go out and nudge them so that they don't hit the Earth. In other words, we will prove once and for all that we're smarter than dinosaurs. and so on it goes. There's always an angle, and that angle can be drawn out. And you do enough of this for a long enough time. We're only 20 years into it. Keep it up for a few more 100 or 1,000 years. People will get used to long-term thinking. At least that's our hope. Back in 1968, when I started the Whole Earth catalog, I think one of the reasons it eventually took off and found an audience and made a difference for people is the Whole Earth frame, which was a direct product of the Apollo project, going to the moon. We got photographs of the Earth from space that reframed everything for people. And those Earth photographs basically gave us the big here that we occupy. And so it seems consistent to me that what we're working on now, you might call the big now, the long now. That was the frame, our big frame of reference in space. This is our big frame of reference in time. And signs are that when people go up a bit, go up a distance in altitude or in time from their daily, decadal business cycle, political cycle, news cycle concerns, a certain comfort comes with that, a certain optimism comes with that longer frame, and a certain sense of responsibility comes with that longer frame. There's a feeling of possibility that emerges, we found. So there's no way that we can solve climate change in 5 years' time. And people who focus on that despair. But if you think about it as a 100 or 200 year problem fitting into the 10,000 year time frame, it seems pretty workable. All you got to do is bear down year after year, decade after decade, do these various incremental things, aggregate the ones that work, they add up, you should get ahead of the problem. That goes for injustice, it goes for hunger, it goes for a lot of things. And so the long term is a problem-solving frame that is encouraging, because you don't have to understand right now what it's going to take to fix something that seems intractable. I think the third question with any nonprofit is what's the business idea, what's the business model, if any. And I think in reality those things emerge. I've been working on this for nearly 20 years now. I'm not paid. Danny Hillis, the co-founder, is building our 10,000-year clock. He's not paid. We're happy to put our time into this thing, which is so rewarding. But obviously there's a lot of things that do cost. And over time we've fallen into something pretty close to what a lot of private libraries and private universities and so on fall into, which is about a third of the income comes from, the revenue comes from individuals who get excited about particular things. A chair, a building, a program, and that's the case here. About a third comes from a gradually built environment, gradually built endowment, which in our case came from Pierre and Pamela Midyar early on, put serious money into our eventual clock site in Nevada, and that functions partly as an endowment for us. We'd love to build that. And about a third comes, as it does for colleges, from student tuitions. Ours comes from this membership, which is encouraged by the SALT series of speakers. They get free tickets once they're $100 a year members. They get into the talks for free, and they get very good video access for free, and various other benefits. And our brand new bar is actual business model. This is the Interval in San Francisco, getting great critical reviews in Yelp and San Francisco Chronicle. It's the hippest bar in San Francisco. People are using it to hang out, they're using it for events, they're using it for presentations. And we charge for drinks. We're some of the best drinks in the city, so we can charge a pretty good price. If we do that, we get a 10,000-year bar going. We'll be around for a while. The conceit of the Long Now Foundation is that some kind of service entity, might be around for thousands of years. And we take that as that we're sort of obligated to do that for building a 10,000-year clock, which we are in West Texas, thanks to Jeff Bezos. There needs to be something that tends to the clock over that long period of time. And institutions don't usually last even half of a human lifetime, but some do. And so one of the things we do is pay attention to ones that do. Some religions do. We're really adamant to not be a religion, because religions tend to get in fights, and if you get in a fight, by and by you win until you lose, and then when you lose, you're gone. So one of our guidelines is ally with competition, and by the way, don't become a religion. I think a fair question is cults form, and the ones that last tend to come up with some kind of service. They come up with a breakfast cereal. Some of them have done that. Or they do salary bells, or they do some other thing which actually helps them with income and with respect and with carrying on. But they always act as if that's just ancillary to their deep spiritual religious message. We just trust having a deep spiritual religious message, and so we would prefer to come up with services that actually do have value over time, and all we are is those services. And so we will manage all the world's languages in connection with each other. We have a new service called Panlex, which is in the process of making all the world's languages translatable into each other. That may be 4,000 documented languages before we're done. We've got a 10,000-year clock to maintain, which is a piece of immersive theater and land art, whatever you want to call it, that won't maintain itself, but should be appealing enough in its own right that just taking care of it can help keep us honest. Bring the woolly mammoth back to life, which is what I'm engaged in right now, these various de-extinction projects. That's at least a 200-year project to get the woolly mammoths back, to get them back in herds, to get the herds back into the Arctic and the subarctic so they can start turning tundra back into grassland, which is good for climate. That's not going to happen quickly. But just bearing down on that service and having that be how people think about Long Now, or just an incubator for those kinds of projects, that's way different than a religion. And so I think that could be the workaround. Now, it requires a generation after generation of certain kind of entrepreneurship, and we won't really know if that plays out until we've actually delivered it. But it's a discipline that hopefully can keep us busy and honest and creative. You have to keep delivering to stay in business. As a religion, you can just keep hearkening back to something that happened some while back. We have the opposite perspective. We've got to keep delivering new, good, valuable, rewarding services. It is. So there's stuff that the president of a country knows, has to know, that is, it's a unique point of convergence, part of the responsibility of that job. CEO of Google is going to know a whole bunch of stuff that broadens the frame of what he has to think about. And you want people with considerable skill and gravitas in those roles. And if you're a business and you don't have that over a period of time, you will go out of business. For the governments don't go out of business. Governments have this other task. And I think we're still, in Neuberger's line was, we are rewriting the social contract that citizens make with their government. And understanding that, for example, privacy norms are in flux. They are in flux with the private sector, with Google and Amazon and everybody. And they're in flux with government. And so NSA, for example, is now deciding to apply the kinds of privacy protections they offer U.S. citizens to users of the internet all over the world. They don't have to do that. But their sense of responsibility is requiring them to do that. And the transparency that they did not ask for but got handed to them, basically by the ability of Edward Snowden to use the net to tell a lot of their secrets, puts them in that position. So this multi-directional transparency is in the process of discovering the norms that are going to be right for everybody in the long term. Right for the security of the internet, of the infrastructure, and right for people feeling like they have some say in who they are online, basically. And rediscovering what we care about. I mean, my father was intensely private. He didn't want anybody to know about what he did with money. As a result, I did not know that he paid for my college education. I thought my mother did. Which was, a stupid misunderstanding to have in the family. So some of these things getting a little more transparent are probably good. And maybe we all need to know what you're doing with your air conditioner, John.